El Mayo, captured in 2024, has now pled guilty to two major federal charges under the Kingpin Law, which was enacted specifically for drug cartels, and the RICO Act, which was enacted for organized crime in general. So, what are these statutes? Well, the Federal Continuing Criminal Enterprise, the CCE statute, is known as the Kingpin Law, and it criminalizes leading a drug trafficking organization. Key elements include violation of a federal narcotics law, which is usually manufacturing or distributing of controlled substances. And this has to be part of a continuing series of at least 3 violations involving 5 or more people acting in concert, where the defendant acts as the organizer, manager, supervisor, or the financier. Now that's the CCE charge. Separately, we have the RICO charge, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO. This targets organized crime just in general, by criminalizing participation in an enterprise that engages in a specific, repeated criminal activity. Now, that criminal activity has to be on this list of activities, but the list is broad. It includes things like bribery, extortion, fraud, drug trafficking, money laundering, and murder, just to name a few. And both of these statutes were enacted in response to sneaky defense lawyers. The argument used to be in defending these kingpins was that, hey, my client didn't personally kill anybody. My client didn't physically transport drugs across the border. My client didn't physically have the drugs at all. And they were able to get out of charges for a while. Now, of course, these kingpins were the ones that ordered other people to commit the crimes, but since they weren't personally committing the acts, they had an out. Well, RICO ended all of that. Now, if you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. The guy that ordered the hit is just as guilty as the guy that pulled the trigger. And ultimately, that's how they nailed El Mayo. Welcome back to Lawyer Up, where we dissect high-stakes legal cases and their real-world impacts. I'm Joshua Roberts, attorney at law with over 28 years of experience in the field of criminal defense, specifically at the federal level. And if you love narco entertainment, you've come to the right place, because we have full-length feature videos on all of the cartels, the central figures dating all the way back to the 60s. We have videos of the life of El Mayo, El Chapo, the Sinaloa cartel as a whole, just to name a few. But today, our focus is on the guilty plea of one of the Sinaloa cartel's founders, Ismael El Mayo Zambada Garcia, the elusive Sinaloa cartel co-founder. We're going to cover his history, the dramatic U.S. arrest, the charges, the guilty plea, and the looming life sentence. So buckle up, because this is cartel justice at its peak. If you're new to the station, hit that subscribe button and remember to turn on notifications. It all started on January 1st of 1948 in Sinaloa, Mexico. Ismael Zambada Garcia, known as El Mayo, grew up in poverty, starting out as a farmer before turning to marijuana smuggling in the 1970s. By the 80s, he had joined the Guadalajara cartel under Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, rising through the ranks with really under-the-radar, low-profile tactics, unlike some of his other flashy rivals. Felix Gallardo's 1989 arrest splintered the Guadalajara cartel. El Mayo would then co-found what became known as the Sinaloa cartel, along with Joaquin El Chapo Guzman and Hector Luis Palma. Eventually, they would control trafficking in Sinaloa, Durango, and Chihuahua. They would smuggle marijuana, cocaine, and heroin via planes, boats, tunnels, and trucks into U.S. cities, and they allied with the Juarez cartel for a spell, and then ultimately the Colombian suppliers. And despite a multi-million-dollar bounty on his head by the FBI, El Mayo evaded capture for decades. And after El Chapo's 2016 arrest, El Mayo took primary control, along with Los Chapitos, which are El Chapo's kids. El Mayo's focus was fentanyl, and he became the guy in charge of production using Chinese chemical precursors, which really fueled the opioid crisis in the United States. And El Mayo's life was really very much a mystery until his son Vicente in 2019 testified at a trial. It gave us a sneak peek behind the curtain of the Sinaloa cartel, revealing that they were spending over $1 million a month in bribes to Mexican officials. So let's fast forward to July 25th, 2024. After being wanted by law enforcement for 35 years, El Mayo is arrested in El Paso, Texas. He was betrayed by El Chapo's son, Joaquin Guzman Lopez, who is also facing charges in the U.S. And while this issue is controversial, the story is that Joaquin lured El Mayo aboard a private plane under the pretenses of scouting some airstrip properties in northern Mexico. But the plane bypassed northern Mexico and landed at the Santa Teresa Airport in El Paso, where U.S. agents swarmed the jet, arresting both without resistance. This sting operation, months in planning, marked a DEA triumph and would not have been possible without Guzman Lopez flipping and cooperating with the DEA for leniency in his own case. El Mayo, age 76 at the time of his arrest, appeared frail, but he was composed when he appeared in court, first in Texas and then once again when he was extradited to New York. Zambada Garcia was charged with indictments filed in New York, Texas, Illinois, California, and D.C. However, pursuant to his plea agreement, El Mayo has agreed to combine the New York and Texas cases into one case in New York, with the rest of the indictments to be dismissed at the time of sentencing. On August 25th, 2025, El Mayo pled guilty before Brooklyn judge Brian Cogan, ending his years of defiance. He pled guilty to being a principal leader of a continuing criminal enterprise from January of 1989 through January of 2024, and to a RICO charge for his participation in money laundering, murder, kidnapping, and drug distribution conspiracies between January 1st of 2000 and April 11th of 2012. His sentencing is set for January 13th of 2026, and of relevance is that El Mayo will face a mandatory minimum sentence of life in prison for leading the continuing criminal enterprise. He'll also face a maximum sentence of life in the RICO case, but at age 77, the minimum mandatory of life is effectively the rest of his existence. As part of the plea agreement, El Mayo agreed to entry of a judgment for $15 billion, that's with a B, dollars, as a money forfeiture, although collection of that judgment will be difficult, if not impossible. For what it's worth, he acknowledged the harm. He said, "I apologize for the damage caused by illegal drugs in the United States and Mexico." After the plea, the U.S. Attorney's Office issued a press release which sums up the case pretty well. It read in part, "El Mayo's rise to power began at the cartel's inception and ended with his arrest in July of 2024. The cartel continues as a drug trafficking organization based in Sinaloa, Mexico, that since the late 1980s has imported large quantities of narcotics, including cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and fentanyl, into the United States and has laundered billions of dollars in drug proceeds back to Mexico. The cartel's operations initially focused on marijuana, but this changed in the 2000s when the Colombians, seeing an increased law enforcement activity in the U.S., abandoned their U.S. distribution business in favor of permitting Mexican traffickers to invest in cocaine shipments at wholesale prices and leaving the Mexican traffickers to deal with the headaches of distribution in the United States. As a result, Mexican traffickers and the Sinaloa cartel began to take a more integral role in moving cocaine from Colombia into and throughout the United States. And the statement goes on. It says, under El Mayo's leadership, the cartel would also branch out into the production and trafficking of fentanyl, including purchasing fentanyl precursor chemicals from Chinese companies and producing thousands of kilos of fentanyl in laboratories for distribution in the U.S. The cartel's distribution network also have supported money laundering efforts that have delivered billions of dollars in illegal profits generated from drug sales in the U.S. back to the cartel. Increased profits allowed the cartel's operations to grow a large-scale narcotics transportation network involving the use of land, air, and sea transportation. The cartel has always operated with impunity at the highest levels of the Mexican drug trafficking world by being assured of continued success and safety from arrest through the payment of bribes to Mexican government officials and law enforcement officers. And I know this is long, but this was the press release, and it's really good. It goes on to say the cartel controlled corrupt officials and officers who protected workers and drug shipments as drugs were transported across Mexico and into the U.S. Numerous witnesses have testified, including at the trials of El Chapo and the corrupt former Mexican Secretary of Public Security, that corruption at all levels was necessary to allow the cartel's criminal enterprise to function so effectively and at such a large scale. From local police officers who escorted the drugs through Mexico to corrupt officials who informed the cartel of military actions, thwarted capture operations, and consulted with the cartel about the proceedings and investigations against it. That was from the U.S. Attorney's Office, a press release which pretty much sums it up. It's hard to believe that El Mayo is done. But this case highlights the U.S.-Mexico extradition power and RICO's bite against cartels. From farmer to fugitive, El Mayo's fall warns all kingpins that no one is untouchable. That is today's episode. That is the update. Thank you for watching. I'm Joshua Roberts, and you've been watching Lawyer Up.